Hey everyone, welcome to Hearth Remedies. My name is Callum. I use any pronouns. And today I wanted to explore a different topic than my nutrition series that I've been working on. I wanted to talk a little bit about recovering from codependency. I myself am a recovering codependent. I have been in recovery since 2016, I want to say. It's been a few years. It is a daily practice and something that I work on. And so today I wanted to talk about healing from codependency, what it is, how you start to identify as a codependent, and recover from codependency. The way that I have seen codependency defined on the internet, or like an older definition for it, was over reliance or dependence on a partner in a romantic relationship, that the other person is a narcissist or the other person is an addict, usually an alcoholic, and that the codependent is this person who is obsessed with controlling or being compliant to the addict. I will say that you can be a codependent who is not in a relationship with a narcissist, and codependency is not just in romantic relationships. If you're a codependent, you bring it to all of your relationships, familial, platonic, coworkers. It can severely affect every aspect of your life. While I think codependents do tend to get into relationships with people who cannot be emotionally available to them, codependents also get into relationships with other codependents, have codependent friendships. It really is all encompassing. There's a lot of misinformation about what codependency is, and I wanted to address that and really get down to the root of it. Mildred has decided to join me. I first started identifying as a codependent at the end of my last long term relationship that was ending. We had both been in therapy. It was one of those situations where we were broken up, got back together, broke up, got back together. It was like we couldn't stay away from each other. We couldn't end like the toxic cycle that we were in. And I believe that their therapist had brought up to them that I might be a codependent, or that they were a codependent or something like that. And basically, they gave me that information. And I don't think I was as open to learning about it at the time because I felt very defensive. While we were separated, I started going to CODA meetings. I found them very helpful, and that's when I started identifying as a codependent. So you might be wondering, well, how do I know if I'm a codependent? What actually is that then? There is a list of patterns and characteristics of codependency that I think is very helpful to aid in self-evaluation, and basically you can use it to determine if you think that you might be struggling with codependency. Whether you begin to identify yourself in that way is really up to you. So I thought that maybe we could go through the list and talk about it a little bit. So there are different categories. There is denial patterns, low self-esteem patterns, compliance patterns, control patterns, and avoidance patterns. With denial patterns, codependents often have difficulty identifying what they are feeling. So literally not knowing how you feel, and even if you know how you feel, not even being able to say the words and express that to someone. Codependents often minimize, alter, or deny how they truly feel. Someone says, "Are you okay?" And you're like, "Yeah, I'm fine." And you're not fine. You're not fine. You're minimizing it, denying it, um, perceiving themselves as completely unselfish and dedicated to the well being of others. I think this is a really interesting one. If I had friends over for dinner, I would be just going around and trying to serve everyone and making sure they're okay because, I'm so dedicated to everyone here. It's not actually appropriate. Lacking empathy for the feelings and needs of others. Codependents often label others with their negative traits. It's often because they cannot identify how they feel and what they are experiencing, so they don't see themselves properly, and begin projecting how they see themselves or their own negative stuff onto other people. It's a bit messy. Codependents often think that they can take care of themselves without the help of anyone else. Codependents often mask pain in ways such as anger, humor, or isolation, being self deprecating and making jokes. I used to do this in therapy a lot where I would say horrifying, traumatic things that happened to me. And because I couldn't access those feelings properly, I would make jokes about it. Codependents often express negativity or aggression in indirect and passive ways. Codependents often do not recognize the unavailability of those to whom they are attracted, going after the person who is the least available for you and the least able to meet your needs. So let's talk about some low self esteem patterns. Codependents often have difficulty making decisions. I still have difficulty making decisions. My partner this morning offered, they said, would you like coffee or would you like tea? And for some reason, this paralyzed me completely. I could not make that decision for 5 whole minutes. And again, I think this goes back to not being able to identify what you're feeling, what are your needs, what are your thoughts. Codependents often judge what they think, say, or do harshly as not good enough or as never good enough. Codependents are often embarrassed to receive recognition, praise, or gifts. I really struggle with this, and owning my own business where I have to kind of promote myself, and people, if they receive something that I did positively, I have a very difficult time accepting that. And it feels like something is grating against my being when someone compliments me. Codependents often value others' approval of their thinking, feelings, and behavior over their own. Codependents often do not perceive themselves as lovable or worthwhile persons. Codependents often seek recognition and praise to overcome feeling less than, have difficulty admitting a mistake. I think this one is really interesting because it's a low self esteem pattern. It's not an ego thing that keeps a codependent feeling very self righteous and, thinking that they're right. It's low self esteem and not being able to admit they made a mistake, because if I made a mistake, I'm a bad person, I'm worthless. Like this is how the thought process goes. Need to appear right in the eyes of others and may even lie to look good. Are unable to identify or ask for what they need and want. Perceive themselves as superior to others. Look to others to provide their sense of safety. Because they have low self-esteem, they don't trust themselves. They don't find safety or worthiness within themselves, so they look to others to provide that. Have difficulty getting started, meeting deadlines, completing projects. I struggle with this so much in my business, and it really is a low self esteem pattern where I start thinking that the project is no good and then I abandon it or scrap it when I really should have just pushed through and seen it to the end, and maybe it would have surprised me. Have trouble setting healthy priorities and boundaries. This is huge. Codependents really struggle with setting boundaries, really struggle with prioritizing what is best for them. Is anyone else feeling dragged yet? Whew. Compliance patterns. Codependents are often extremely loyal, remaining in harmful situations for too long. It's important to remember this doesn't only apply to romantic relationships. A codependent will also stay at a toxic, abusive job for too long. Codependents often compromise their own values and integrity to avoid rejection or anger. And this is when people start really losing themselves. Codependents often put aside their own interest in order to do what others want. I think that we can all be guilty of this, not standing up for ourselves and what we actually want to do. But you can imagine if you're used to doing what someone else wants to do all the time, you have difficulty voicing your feelings or identifying your feelings, or you minimize them, you stop setting healthy boundaries, you stop looking out for yourself or advocating for yourself and what you want, what you need to do, and it can be a recipe for disaster. Codependents are hypervigilant regarding the feelings of others and take on those feelings. Codependents are afraid to express their beliefs, opinions, and feelings when they differ from those of others. Codependents accept sensual attention, is the word I'll use, when they want love. Codependents make decisions without regard to the consequences and give up their truth to gain the approval of others or to avoid change. Control patterns. Codependents often believe that everyone else is incapable of taking care of themselves. Like they, the codependent, have to do everything for everyone, otherwise the world would self-destruct or something. And they often attempt to convince others what to think, what to feel. They'll give unsolicited advice, and then they will become resentful when other people decline their advice because they never asked for it and they don't want it. But the codependent will then use that to feel rejected and resentful. Then they will also lavish gifts and favors on those whom they want to influence. They will use sensual attention to gain approval. They have to feel needed in order to have a relationship with others, which again points to why they end up in relationships with people who might have addictions. They choose people that need them or that they think need them, often demand that their needs are met by others because they don't meet their own needs. Use charm and charisma to convince others of their capacity to be caring and compassionate. Use blame and shame to exploit others emotionally. Refuse to cooperate, compromise, or negotiate. Adopt an attitude of indifference, helplessness, authority, or rage to manipulate outcomes. And use recovery jargon in an attempt to control others. And the last one is avoidance patterns. Codependents often act in ways that invite others to reject, shame, or express anger towards them. They judge harshly what others think, say, or do. Avoid emotional, physical, or sexual intimacy as a way to maintain distance. Allow their addictions to people, places, and things to distract them from achieving intimacy in relationships. Use indirect or evasive communication to avoid conflict or confrontation. Diminish their capacity to have healthy relationships by declining to use the tools of recovery. Suppress their feelings or needs to avoid feeling vulnerable. Pull people toward them, but when they get close, push them away. Refuse to give up their self-will to avoid surrendering to a power greater than themselves. Believe displays of emotion are a sign of weakness, and withhold expressions of appreciation. It's really just a shit show of a list, right? If we're all being honest with ourselves, we can admit that we all have some codependent patterns or characteristics that we don't love about ourselves that we would like to change. Whether or not we identify as a codependent, we live in a codependent society. A lot of these characteristics are how people interact with one another, and it's so normalized. I hope that hearing the patterns and characteristics is helpful for some people. I often see memes or TikToks about one of these patterns, and people in the comments will always be like, oh my God, why do I do this? Like, what can I do? Because I don't actually want to be like this. Part of my own codependence recovery is to kind of spread the message to other codependents who may be struggling and hopefully get more people thinking about their own codependency and recovery if that's what they want to do. I think that we all deserve freedom from these types of communication. It doesn't serve us, and I think that we all deserve peace and freedom and to be able to identify our thoughts, our feelings, and our needs and express them to people who it's safe to express them to. We all deserve, healthy, loving relationships, and we deserve to unlearn these toxic ways of existence that usually come from living in a dysfunctional home or having a dysfunctional family. Not necessarily, but if there was dysfunction, chances are dysfunction is the cycle that will be continued until it stops. A lot of us might have had codependent parents, and we picked up their patterns of communication, or we tried to go the other direction and ended up communicating still codependently, but like on the other side of the spectrum. There are lots of ways that I have tried to recover from codependency. I take many approaches, and the culmination of everything that gets me closer to where I need to be. I do need to have a spiritual practice. I think a spiritual practice is helpful in recovering codependency because we have to admit that we are powerless, which is the first step, right? Is to admit that we are powerless and that our lives have gotten out of control. And from that powerlessness, we can see that, okay, well, if I'm not the one in control and I don't have to control everything, who is controlling everything? Who can I look to for guidance? And usually it's the universe or God, however you define God. I think that people can be very put off by that, especially if they have had a dysfunctional codependent relationship with their organized religion that they grew up with. A good way to look at it maybe is detachment, letting go of outcomes, realizing that you can't control everything and letting go of that fear. For me, prayer is really important, meditation is really important. But if you're not into those things and you were still trying to gain a sense of like a higher self, journaling can be important for a number of reasons, one of which being documenting and holding yourself accountable for how you are behaving, how you are interacting with others, what your day to day life looks like, as well as documenting what you want to be doing, what you would like your life to look like, dreaming, hoping, manifesting, seeing a life beyond that which you have, tracking your recovery. And it's amazing when you look back at old journals and you see where you came from versus today. You can kind of see the difference that recovery has made and how different that you are. I think that journaling is also helpful because it helps you to identify your thoughts, your feelings, and your needs. What am I feeling? What am I thinking? And what do I need? Because if I can establish those things, then I can express them, because then I can set a boundary. Then I can, hold myself accountable to honor my thoughts, my feelings, and my needs. There are tons of books and resources on codependency, but I will say that I do not believe they're all created equal. A really popular one is The Language of Letting Go by Melody Beadle. I will say that that book, I think, is a good kind of introduction, but so it's specifically written from that perspective of like assuming that you're married to an alcoholic, which can be completely irrelevant for a lot of us. What I really like from Melody Beadle is there's a meditations book that goes with The Language of Letting Go. I think it's literally just like called Daily Meditations on Codependency. That one I really like. I think that could be helpful for literally anyone, to be honest. My partner and I, we like to read the daily meditations. We will read them together and then we will talk about it with one another, about how we relate to it or how we've seen it manifest in our own lives, either in the past or the present, or, just something that we will reflect on together. If you were wanting to do it alone, which is obviously valid too, you could write about it. There's also codependency meetings. You can go to Codependents Anonymous if you're the type of person who needs like a community around you. One of the most important things with codependency recovery is holding yourself accountable, looking at the roots of your codependency. Where did it come from? Seeing a way forward, looking at the recovery patterns, looking at like what your goals are for how you want to communicate, how you want to be. You're trying new hobbies, putting yourself outside of your comfort zone, and like giving yourself a little fun and a little freedom. And that's really just the beginning for healing codependency. I would love to hear if you have any other ideas for recovering from codependency, something that you've been working on. For me, I feel like it's a lifelong process because of the way that I grew up. I don't know if I'll ever be like fully free from it unless I am constantly aware and like trying to unlearn it. That's okay. It's okay to be recovering and in recovery. I think that the pandemic set me back a lot. Like I had a major relapse. And even before then, I like fucked up an entire career because of my codependency, to be truly honest. But that's a story for another day. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, Hearth Remedies. I'm also on Instagram and I have my own website. And until next time, have a great day. Bye.